Okay. Hey everyone, it's Roger, music director of Symphony, New Hampshire, and I'm with a very dear friend and special guest, Paul Dooley. Hey Paul.
How you doing, Roger?
I'm doing well. It's great to have you here. And right now we should be at the Keep Center for the Arts, getting ready for our family program and about to perform your piece, The Conductor Spellbook. But unfortunately, due to COVID, we have to postpone the concert until the fall. So I thought today it would be neat to just dive into your piece a little bit and talk about the inspiration behind the piece and the story, and just kind of give our audience members a sense of what to expect when they do see the piece live. But before we do that, where are you speaking to us from today?
Well, right now I'm actually in New Hampshire. Normally I live in Michigan. I teach at the University of Michigan, but my girlfriend lives in Newmarket, New Hampshire, and she's a postdoc at University of New Hampshire in infectious diseases, ironically. But I'm here in Newmarket just with her and working away.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I am here in Long Beach, California, so we are quite far from one another right now, but my wife and I are quarantining here, and we do miss our audiences, of course. It's not the same without all of our audience members right now, but the best thing to do right now is to be safe and to be responsible about not being in a large crowd, so socially distanced, as they say. But right now, yeah, we miss making music for you. And all of our audience members have been so supportive during this time. And I, of course, encourage all of you to check out our website, symphonynh.org, to learn about our future concert plans, because there will be a season in the fall, and we are going to continue to present music for you, because this is only temporary, and we have a lot to look forward to. So I'm so excited to be performing this piece, Paul. I think it's just an absolutely delightful piece for all audience ages, not just kids, but adults as well. And I think what makes it so interesting and fun is the different ways you incorporate narration and music and these wonderful themes. I always say it's like a modern day Peter and the Wolf. And in many ways it is. And, you know, just before we dive into it again, Paul and I met at the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music in 2011. You remember that?
That's almost 10 years ago now. Yeah, that's great time.
Hard to believe. It really is hard to believe. And I've had the privilege of conducting Paul's works now for the last 10 years, you know, a variety of different works I've premiered. And I believe the first time I did your Conductor Spellbook was at the Lake George Music Festival in 2018, actually. And then I went on to do it with the Pacific Symphony in Costa Mesa, California, with you narrating the work.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great experience. But in many ways, how about you just talk about the way that you were inspired to become a composer and your musical background?
Sure. Well, I was thinking, a lot of your audiences may be in elementary school or middle school. I started music around that age. In third grade, I think, I really didn't want to do music, but my mom just said, just try an instrument. I don't care which one it is, just try. And so I picked percussion. And of course, I fell in love with it after a few days and became obsessed with the drums, and eventually got a drum set. And music became a very important part of my life. In addition to soccer, that was the other big part of my life at the time. When I was in middle school, I got interested in piano, and I got interested in improvising at the piano, and I sat down at the piano one day and started playing it, and I fell in love with it. So from the very beginning, I was always kind of just like making up my own music. And the crucial moment was when I actually was trying to learn a few classical pieces. I tried learning a little Clementi sonata, this easy piano piece, piano pieces for kids to learn. And I didn't know what a key signature was, which is, you change some of the notes to different notes. So I played the piece incorrectly. But I eventually figured out that, I wasn't playing it the right way, but I actually liked my way more. And then that was kind of the light bulb for me, and I turned that into my own piece, and I took it all in a different direction. And then, moving forward, getting into high school, I just spent most of my time trying to write music. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I had several pieces and sort of built up a portfolio, um, that I could use to apply to colleges. And I applied to study music composition in college, and I went to USC, University of Southern California. I'm from Northern California, by the way, so I wanted to stay close to home, and and then that was a great experience there. I also got a math degree there, um, but after the 4.5 years there, I wanted to continue my studies and focus solely on music composition, and I did a master's and doctorate finally at the University of Michigan, where I now teach, um, actually electronic music. So,
Wow.
and I'm still there in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Those are two fantastic music schools for our audience members who don't know. University of Michigan and the University of Southern California have outstanding music programs. And I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of musicians from those schools. And it's really impressive what they are doing right now in the professional music world, whether it be playing professionally with an orchestra, composing, or teaching at different universities. It's really fantastic. Well, the thing with this piece is that recently I feel like, at least in the last year, your Conductor Spellbook has been performed all over the country, really all over the world. Now, I'm curious, what was the inspiration behind this piece? Because I know that you've written works of a variety of styles for chamber ensembles, for wind ensemble, for full orchestra, um, all different sorts of pieces. But this piece has a very particular purpose, I feel. And I'm just curious, what was the inspiration behind it and how did it come to be?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer, but I was fortunate to work with the Naples Philharmonic, Naples, Florida, 3 or 4 years ago. One of my colleagues at Michigan was the assistant conductor there, and they played one of my pieces because he programmed it with them. And that went really well. And it was actually programmed on a children's concert where the children come from all over the state to see the orchestra play. And I went on stage, and I think I talked about percussion, and I was sort of a guest speaker for the concert. And then the following year, um, they asked me to write a new piece, a whole piece. And the piece was meant for elementary school students, and it was to sort of introduce children to music and vibration and the sort of the science of sound. And that's all they told me. So the Conductor Spellbook is the result of that. Just
Mhm.
those kind of two prompts. At first,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure like how to do what to do at all. Um, do you adapt an older story? Do I do something uh, like a Disney story or something, an old-fashioned story, The Sword and the Stone or something, and then turn that into something new? Or do I create my own story? And over the course of an entire year, I eventually decided to write my own story and write my own narration. It took a long time to come to that, but that ended up being the best solution.
Neat. Now I have to ask you though, Paul, when you were growing up, did you go to any family concerts or educational concerts? Because I actually didn't have the opportunity really to go to any of these sorts of concerts. So it wasn't until I started conducting them did I realize how influential and inspiring they can be to kids. So I was wondering if that had anything to do with you composing this piece, your experience of attending a family concert or an educational concert.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll never forget my first concert. I actually went to see the San Francisco Symphony. I'm from Santa Rosa, so my preschool, I can't remember, it was so young, but preschool or elementary school, kindergarten, we drove down in a bus to go see the San Francisco Symphony, and I had never seen the orchestra before, and it was just an overwhelming experience, all these new sounds. And the one thing I actually really remember from it was the timpani, the big kettle drums, and I was terrified of the timpani. And whenever the player would grab the mallets to start playing, and he would grab the mallets, and I would go, "Oh no, he's gonna play!" So um, I'll never forget that. And there's a very clear moment in the Conductor's Spellbook where I reference that. There's a big ominous timpani solo that is supposed to be fun and also a little bit scary, because that's the experience I had, and I wanted it to last with all of our young audience members.
Fantastic. And, I also kind of had a scary experience for my first symphony orchestra concert. It was with the New York Philharmonic performing Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. What a terrifying piece of music, but it was the piece that made me want to become a musician. You wouldn't necessarily put that piece on a family concert, but it was one of those pieces that I just couldn't get enough of. And of course, that led me to go to music school for trumpet, and eventually I picked up conducting. So that's a whole other story, though. But that's great, Paul. Before we go into the piece of music itself, what are some of the different places that this piece has been performed? I'm just curious, because I know it has been getting a lot of traction with different orchestras over the last year or two. And I know you've also been narrating this work, which is a completely different set of skills from what we do as conductors and composers. So if you could share that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so the piece has been played quite a bit in the past few years. We just had a performance run in Nashville with the Nashville Symphony, which was a real treat. And overseas, it's been played by the Singapore Symphony, and it's been played a lot in Poland, actually. So we've translated it into Polish. We had a performance coming up actually in a few weeks in Macau, China.
Wow.
And we spent quite a while translating the piece into Cantonese. And so I was going to go narrate it there in English, and there was going to be other performances in Cantonese. The piece has also been translated into Spanish, hopefully for some upcoming performances. But yeah, it's been played quite a bit, and by many, many different orchestras all around the United States. And in terms of narrating, Detroit Symphony was actually the first orchestra to ask me to narrate it. They were actually the second orchestra ever to play the piece. And as a composer, composers are quiet people generally, and we spend a lot of time by ourselves in our studio working away. And so the idea of narrating a piece in front of a few thousand people, was not something I had really thought about. And I almost said no. But then I said, this is something I should really learn how to do. And I know the piece really well, so I almost have it memorized. So I spent months and months learning the piece. And at University of Michigan, we have a lot of really talented faculty members. So I reached out to one of our theater professors, our acting professors, and I got an acting coach. And honestly, after 2 meetings with her name's Gillian Eaton, fantastic actress. She prepared me. I learned so much from her in just a few lessons, and I felt much more comfortable going on stage. And now I've done the piece many times, and it's always a lot of fun.
Well, I really enjoyed performing it with you when we did it with the Pacific Symphony 2 years ago, and I thought that your interaction and engagement with the audience was so fun and so engaging. I thought that in many ways it was just natural. So bravo to you for your narration skills. They're really, really inspiring. And actually, I remember, you couldn't remember this. We did perform it at Lake George, and you were unable to make the performance. So Christine, my wife, who is a musicologist and violinist, ended up narrating it. And she had so much fun doing it. She was a little bit nervous because as a musicologist, you spend a lot of time in the library, and you're not usually, speaking to a large group of kids. So for her, it was a real treat, but she comes from a teaching background. So I thought it came off very natural for her, but she really enjoyed it, just so you know. So the story behind this piece it's pretty simple. Tony Stradivarius is the main character. He is taking a field trip with his school to see the symphony, and he discovers this book of spells that he eventually uses to control the orchestra and the conductor. It's a great premise to begin with, and I love how you incorporate different types of music in the piece. There's Renaissance music. There is, of course, more romantic, lush music in here. And there's also this sense of just childlike wonder throughout the piece, both in terms of the speaking and the way you incorporate the different instruments and assign them to different themes. Now, what I love about it is, again, the idea that each instrument has a particular theme. So I'm just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you assign each instrument to a particular theme.
Sure. Well, I knew I wanted to introduce every instrument of the orchestra, and even before I had the story figured out, I started writing themes for different instruments, sort of imagining this magical scenario. And you know what happens is sort of, as you mentioned, Tony goes to see the orchestra with his class, but the real magic actually happens after the concert. You know, all the students go home, and young Tony Stradivarius sneaks away and stays behind, and he's by himself in the concert hall. And that's when he discovers this magical book. And he learns that the orchestra will magically come alive when he opens the book and learns about conducting. So what we learn is that, you know, to be a conductor, you have to learn about all the instruments and how they work together to make music. So that lent itself to introducing all the different instruments and how they, in particular, I focused on how they vibrate. How do they actually make the sound which gets projected into the air that we all hear? And so I just broke it down, and you know, I tried to write music that worked very idiomatically for each instrument. You know, an oboe plays something that works really well for an oboe, or a flute plays something that works really well for a flute. So that's kind of how I approached it.
Yeah, and just give our audience a preview of how the piece begins, because I think it really begins in a way that is almost mysterious and a little bit spooky in a way. I always say this concert, or this piece, would work well for a Halloween concert, because it has this vibe of The Sorcerer's Apprentice at times, and then it goes to Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf, and I really think there's so many different musical emotions in this piece. So I would love it if you could play just the beginning of the work for us, just to give our audience a sense of what to expect. And before you do that, Paul, I need to show the cover of the score to our audiences, because it's absolutely a work of art. I've never conducted a work or a score that has this type of cover, which is so beautiful, and it really gives off that magical image of the piece. So sorry, I had to do that.
Sure. Yeah, we worked for a solid year on the artwork, and I worked with actually a former student of mine, an amazing artist, Tanner Porter. But let me share my screen, and then I'll play some of the piece for you. This is the big. Okay. Here we go. So this is towards the beginning of the piece. We're just introducing the story of young Tony Stradivarius.
Wonderful.
I want to tell you a story. Now, last year, a group of children just like you, visited this very same concert hall. Conductor Yaniv Segal and the fine musicians of the Detroit Symphony brought these instruments to life with sounds of sweet blissfulness. But after the concert, after the parents had rounded up everyone to go home, young Tony Stradivarius wasn't there. Tony snuck away. And Tony waited until all the orchestra members had left the concert hall too. Tony was alone, or so he thought. But just then, Tony saw the beautiful string instruments lying behind the stage slowly begin to come to life. Next, Tony saw, springing to life, instruments that you blow air into. Then, big, beautiful, curvy French horns joined the...
Okay.
Wow.
So that gave you a little idea of how we get going.
It is just so much fun, and what a way to begin a piece of music. I mean, there's energy, like I said, it's mysterious at times. The way you incorporate the narration with the music is really compelling, and just, it's absolutely fantastic. So I hope that gives you a sense of the opening of the work to all of our listeners watching right now. Just, briefly talk about, Paul, if you can, just what does each instrument represent? Like, I noticed the timpani has a lot of solos in that section. What does it represent in your view, or what are you trying to get across with these different instruments?
Well, with the timpani in particular, I used to play timpani, and so I know how it works, and so I love writing for it. The piece, sort of the music you heard, has a little bit of a Baroque feel, and I love the idea of having this Baroque music, but just juxtaposed with something very primal sounding that would really draw in our young audience. Like I said, I was always very drawn in and frankly scared by the timpani. So just trying to create a way to kind of merge two different styles of music. That's what I was thinking there. And then just, again, writing the solos for all the different instruments, as you'll hear later in the piece. Just finding, in particular with the woodwinds, we have each woodwind instrument, as Tony discovers, has its own special power. And so I write music around exploiting each instrument's special abilities, and that becomes part of the story, and how Tony learns about how the instruments work, and then how they can all play together so he can make music.
It's wonderful. And one of my favorite parts in this piece is that you give a theme to the harp and the vibraphone every time that there is a magical spell that is about to take place. And I think that this combination of colors is just brilliant. In my score, the narration is wonderful as well. And I would love it if you could play that theme. The magical spell theme is what I call it. And here in my score, the script is repeat after me, woodly, whistly, woodly, wood. And then you get the magical theme from the vibraphone and the harp, which is just, I think, so interesting. And it has this sense of mysteriousness, and it's a spooky, almost spooky theme. So if you could play that, I would love to hear it and give our audience a sense of that.
So yeah, every time we create a spell, the children will shout out a spell, and then this magic music plays, and then the magic thing happens with the instruments playing. So let me share my screen again. And here we go.
Repeat after me. Woodly, whistly, woodly, wood.
It is.
Wood.
Yeah, that's that little magic thing.
Isn't it? I mean, just I don't know how you came up with that combination of instruments, but it works so well. I think it really does. And
that theme becomes very important, and it gets expanded into the climax of the piece, which I'd love to play for you. Yeah, turns into the ominous theme. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another instrument that gets a lot of solos in this piece, and that you use in a very creative way, is the oboe. Do you want to just talk about that section of the piece?
Yeah. So we learn that the oboe's special power is that it can play long, sweet, beautiful melodies without taking any breaths. So the oboe can play forever. And so we have this long melody, lyrical melody, that goes on for quite a while. So let me grab that real fast, and I'll play it for you. Okay, here we go.
Repeat after me. Rococo, oboe, go! The oboe's special power is its...
Yeah, Paul, that section reminds me of the music of Ravel or Debussy. it almost has this French impressionistic character to it. And it's just a beautiful and lyrical theme. So I really think you get the message across of it, there's almost a sense of peacefulness to it.
Yeah, I worked quite a while on that theme. That was like 3 or 4 weeks of work just on that right there. And it's just 3 notes. I mean, it's 3-part counterpoint, but it took a long time to make that.
Give our audience a sense of the climax of the piece, where all of the spells are happening at the same time. What is happening in the story, and what are you doing musically during this section?
So our young protagonist, Tony Stradivarius, learns about these magical spells that make the instruments play in special ways. But what happens is Tony gets a little too carried away with the spells, and he starts making up his own spells. And this causes the orchestra to go a little bit crazy and misbehave. And the orchestra plays so loud that the lights begin to flicker. And suddenly all the lights go out and we have a big problem, and Tony needs to figure out a solution to that. But leading up to that big climax, I take that magic theme that we played just a second ago. It's kind of a weird augmented scale, and that gets expanded into this whole grand section. So you'll hear this climactic music with listen for the brass, which eventually comes in and plays this kind of weird downward scale. It's that same magical music. Okay, let's see here. All right.
Mystico, prestissimo, violinissimo! Prestissimo, violinissimo! The conductor's spellbook rumbled intensely and began to levitate. The orchestra played so loud that the lights began to flicker. Suddenly, Orchestra Hall was dark as night. To Tony, everything sounded spookier in the dark.
Wow.
Okay.
You know, there are moments of John Williams there. I think with the brass and the way you're using the strings, it's almost like movie music at times. Mm-hmm. And I think audiences really, especially kids, younger audiences really connect with that. Of course, this doesn't give you the real listening experience, but it is a preview of what is to come. The great thing about seeing it live is you see the energy of the musicians and you see these wonderful visuals on the screen above the orchestra. If you briefly want to just talk about those illustrations and how they influence the music, that would be great.
Yeah, the first year the piece was played, I just was using all my energy to finish the piece. And then the second year we did another run of performances a year later with the Naples Philharmonic. And in that year, that time, I switched my energy to the artwork, and I worked with an artist, Tanner Porter, to illustrate the entire piece. And it took us almost a year to do. We worked really closely together, coming up with a concept for Tony and how he'd look and everything, and all the different perspectives on him. So the artwork actually came after the music, but there's a really beautiful visual presentation that goes with the piece. The images are moving around the screen, and it really illustrates sort of the grandeur of the piece and Tony being alone in the hall and figuring out how the orchestra works. And then we also have lots of instrument diagrams that show how the instruments work and how they vibrate to make sound.
Well, what I love about the piece, Paul, is that it's educational, but it's entertaining. I mean, the way you explain the different instruments, it's never in a way that's lectury. but it's fun and it's engaging. And I love the fact that you include conducting exercises, because I find a lot of times with family concert pieces, for example, Prokofiev, Peter and the Wolf, which is a masterpiece, I think, they don't really engage the audience members though in any way. And in your piece, there are all these different engagement activities, especially in terms of what a conductor does. I think that's really useful, and audiences enjoy that a lot.
Yeah. I was just going to say that, in terms of figuring out what I was going to do with the story and how I was going to create the piece, the fact that I wanted to have a lot of engagement meant that, I kind of needed to write my own story. So yeah, I've had, obviously our young audience members learn a lot from the piece, but I've had a lot of parents come back after the piece and tell me, wow, I learned a lot about how the violin works, or, how the clarinet vibrates to make sound. So it's a great experience for everyone.
Well, that's why I encourage our audiences in New Hampshire to bring the whole family. It's not just for kids, it's for all ages. And I think anyone can learn something from this piece of music in general. These types of concerts, family concerts, educational concerts, and I think you'll agree with me, Paul, these are the most important concerts that we do as musicians. They are a way to inspire that next generation and really make the concert experience interactive and fun and engaging. And that is so important to remove that, I call it that invisible barrier between the stage and the audience, where we could just have fun and make music. And this is the perfect piece to do that with. And that's why I wanted to start my tenure with Symphony New Hampshire with your piece, because it's new, it's contemporary. And the fact that you were going to be at the performance, and you will be at the performance, is an added bonus. It really is.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. When we figure out when it's going to happen in the fall, it should be a real blast, and I can't wait to hopefully meet some of the young audience members and parents. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Paul. And I would also just like to thank, before I forget, our concert sponsors who were going to support this concert. That is Northeast Delta Dental. So thank you for the support for the family concert, and Paul Dooley's The Conductor Spellbook. Paul, as always, so good to see you. And we will be bringing this piece to life with our audience and orchestra in the fall, hopefully September or October. And I think in many ways, this is going to be just an absolute success, because how can it not be? There's so many great moments, and there's so many interesting, unique musical things that you could learn from a piece like this. So Paul, brilliant work as always, my friend. And I can't wait to see you, hopefully in a few months after all of this has ended. And in the meantime, stay safe, be well, and take care.
All right, you too. Thanks, Roger. Take care.
All right, thank you all. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll be presenting a number of different videos on the Symphony New Hampshire Facebook page and Instagram page. So stay tuned, and we will see you all soon. Thanks.